All right, so like I said, if my parents would have just talked to me, all the crazy stuff wouldn't have happened. If they just would have talked to me or listened to me or saw me. But then, just to continue on with the story, what ends up happening is, like I said, my grandpa, what really bothered me, what really got under my skin so much was, I knew that he had a very low estimation of me. And, the fact of the matter was he lived in Kauai. So he came in high school and my shot had been destroyed by the shoot away machine. My game had been because my dad, I was shooting wrong. It messed up my shot. I can go into details exactly because I'm picking the ball off the rack, and I could tell you exactly how it messed up my shot. And then my dad tried to fix it. It would have never got messed up in the first place. It would have never needed to be fixed in the first place if it wasn't for the shooting machine. Even when I was shooting at first on the shooting machine, or when my dad would pass me, I was shooting right. But it messed it up. And then my dad tried to fix it, and he told me to do the exact wrong thing. I could tell you exactly what he told me to do, but with my feet, he told me to do something completely wrong. He was trying to make me shoot sideways, but artificially, like pick the ball off the rack and do it. But he didn't realize the reason why I shot sideways, quote unquote, was how I moved into it. I'm not going to go into details. But I was such a good shooter because I was just automatic. But my dad messed it up, and the shooter messed it up. So at this point, but my grandpa came in, and my grandpa just thought, he didn't understand what was happening. And he didn't know how good I was before. And I'll get more in detail on that later. Like, just one example of that was like in 2018 or something, I'd posted some of my videos of when I played basketball when I was younger online. And I'd like to have more videos. And I don't have enough to really show people how good I was. And like I said, my dad watched every one of my games, but he didn't record because he couldn't watch and record at the same time. And he wanted to watch so bad, he loved it so much. The few videos I had, some of them my dad made highlights, like a highlight film of it. My dad was really into it, but my dad was so worried about, how I looked and stuff. Like he could have recorded more. He didn't want to make me play bad, and he could have, but the mistakes were made. Let's just say mistakes were made. But, my grandpa, he was like, he thought that he thought the reason why me and my dad and I fought was because I was playing against bigger, better players and I was frustrated. That's not what happened. That never was what happened. What happened was my shot was messed up and me and my dad were trying to fix it. We couldn't figure it out. And it led to conflict. And he was trying to fix it and I was shooting wrong and we didn't know it was a shoot away machine. And like I said, if it wasn't for the shoot away machine, none of this stuff would have happened. But my grandpa, later he watched some videos of me when I was in the ninth grade playing basketball and starting on varsity. My grandpa was like, "You started on varsity?" He was like, "You started on varsity as a freshman and Ronaldo Woolridge didn't even play varsity?" He was like, "What?" Like he was surprised because he didn't think I was that good, and that's a problem. He didn't know. So and he had no idea how good I was, and I really was that good, and I was different. Very different, and I would like to have videos that study what I did, how I moved, things I did. No players do it. And I would have been great if it wasn't for the shooting machine, and that's a fact. And even my dad would know that. My mom would know that. Remember, I don't know if my mom would know that. My dad would know that. But my grandpa, my grandpa was just like, oh, he just basically dismissed me. And I knew he had a low estimation of me. And again, he didn't believe the quadrant model either. So in my mind, I'm like, of course my grandpa doesn't want my dad to talk to me and see me because he thinks I'm a freaking crazy loser. That's his estimation of me. And he would deny that. He'd be like, oh, no, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I think it's your software or whatever. I don't know what he would say, but no, that's not the case. He thought that I was a loser. If that's what he thought, if he thought that it was because if it wasn't the shoot away machine, it was because I was playing against bigger, better players. And if he thought, the quadrant model wasn't real, of course he thought I was a loser. Of course he looked down upon me. And he would tell me, well, I want your dad to talk to you, but, your dad doesn't want to. But I knew it wasn't true that he wanted my dad to talk to me because he had a low estimation of me. My grandpa did. And I'll get more into that in detail. But so I really hated my grandpa at this point. And, my grandpa would later be like, well, you have resentment toward me. Yeah, I had resentment toward him because he didn't believe the quadrant model. And then, like I said, he was just started confusing me. So at this point, I couldn't tell if I always saw him as kind of a right winger because he was against giving charity and stuff. Although it's more complicated than that. Because again, he'd say in the flow, later he would like, now he says, well, I can imagine, a society where they have a universal basic income that just gives a bare minimum, but you have to work for, anything else. And, but regardless, he was always kind of against charity. And I thought that was like kind of right wing. And, but at the same time, like he seemed a little bit left wing because he'd be like, there is no, well, I thought it was right wing too, because he'd be like, there's no such thing as homosexual, but he'd be like, there's no such thing as anything. So he's just confusing me. I'm like, what? There's no such thing as homosexual. There's no such thing as black or white, or he says everything is just energy. He'd be like, God is energy and everything is energy. So I was like, okay, but like, I couldn't tell if that was right wing or left wing. Cause it's like, right wingers tend to be more religious, and it seemed a little religious. He seemed more religious, But at the same time, he didn't believe in God, but he believed God is energy. But it's still like new agey religion. I'm just confused. And then my and I didn't realize that Dr. Hora never taught that God is energy. And I didn't even know what Dr. Hora taught until much later. So he's just confusing me. Dr. Hora said that, God is consciousness. And that's more the way that I saw it. I read Dr. Hora's books later, and he said God is consciousness, or he said, God is infinite intelligence. And he would say that, like, not everything is energy, but he would say everything's like a dream. But my grandpa tried to make it all scientific, and he did this exact opposite as Dr. Hora, who he got a PhD under. So it's like he used the new age stuff, but he tried to make it too rationalistic, and he did the exact opposite of what Dr. Hora taught. Like, he's like, no, everything is energy. That's not what Dr. Hora taught. But that's what my grandpa taught. So my grandpa tried to make it like rationalistic and scientific sounding, like, God is energy, everything is energy, and it just confused me. But then my grandpa was talking about, like, I saw things as more consciousness, but my grandpa would be like, yeah, I asked my grandpa, like, what do you think of Bruce Jenner? My grandpa's like, well, he's not a man, he's not a woman, he is energy. And, he said that, like Bruce Jenner, he's making the step in the right direction. He recognizes he's not a man, but he's identifying as a woman though. And to identify as a woman is also a step, it's a step in the right direction. At least he knows he's not a man, but now he's identifying as a woman. And later I would understand, but he'd be like, he's energy. But later I understand what my grandpa was trying to say was that that's what the flow is. Like in the flow, you lose your identity, you lose yourself. And, you're one with everything, right? Or, you are no thing. You go in the flow and, but so my grandpa's confusing me. So I'm like, okay, so you're saying everything's a social construction, like the liberals say. But at the same time, like my grandpa would be like, no, well, there's no such thing as gay. And I thought that was kind of right wing because I thought he was saying, gay's a choice. And he kind of did say that because my grandpa's like, you have to take responsibility for everything. And I was like, well, I always thought there was a gay gene. I was always more liberal. And I was always like, yeah, gays are gays. And, why do they conservatives against gays? It's natural, and it's like probably genetic. But my grandpa, and I guess apparently there is no evidence it's genetic, but, my grandpa was more, like take responsibility for everything and don't blame anything on genes. And, but also my grandpa would be like, it is a little existentially invalid to be promiscuous or to engage in promiscuous homosexual sex. But then at the same time, he's confusing me because he's like, well, in regards to gay marriage, I asked him about the gay marriage and my grandpa's like, well, it's a step in the right direction because, he says there's heterosexuals who just engage in, my grandpa would say special relationships, which are self-confirmatory, relationship oriented. And instead of my grandpa would say mutual participation, which is like a marriage where the two people are participating in something larger than themselves. So it's more conducive to the flow. So my grandpa would be like, a relationship is based around the illusion of two separate people. That's why, later I would understand that's why my grandpa, that's why my grandpa would say Jesus said, in the kingdom of heaven, there is no marriage. Because my grandpa would say, in the kingdom of heaven, which is the flow, my grandpa would say that's the flow. There's no marriage because there is no separate people. Everything is one, right? So it's very new agey, but also I kind of understand what he was trying to say. But, but I was like, is this left wing, right wing? Like, is he saying like, because then my grandpa was like, yeah, well, it's a step in the right direction to allow gay marriage because, there's heterosexuals who just use marriage for, in self-indulgence and sex and stuff like that, which is self-confirmatory and, and to allow gay marriage might be a step in the right direction to, so at least, they're not, he says it could be a concession to break the conservatives out of their self-preoccupation and the idea that they are superior. So, but at the same time, so I'm just getting confused. I'm like, is he liberal? Is he right wing? I'm just confused. My grandpa's confusing me, this is back in the day. And I'm just like, and also like the idea that he was saying everything is energy. I was like, my grandpa, and he looked down upon me because he's like, you don't understand it. You don't understand anything. Like I get the impression he felt he was so smart because my grandpa would be like, he told me that he thought the quadrant model was bullshit. And he said it literally, he thought it was bullshit. But he would say, my theory of everything is energy. And I'd be like, that's not even a theory. And he's like, well, all the evidence points to it. And I'd be like, first off, that's what people say. It's just a new age like idea that it doesn't even really necessarily have evidence to it. And regardless, even if there is quote unquote evidence, again, your sense perceptions, why do you trust your sense perceptions? Dr. Hora said that, everything is consciousness, but my grandpa would be like, well, yeah, energy. Later, my grandpa would move away from the idea of energy and he'd be like, well, yeah, it could be everything is consciousness. So the thing about energy and consciousness is they're apophatic. And that's what's good about it. God is apophatic. You can't say anything about God, but then I'd be like, well, how can you say that you can't say anything about God? You're saying something about God. It's a paradox. But, my grandpa was into this. So he's like, oh, yeah, God could be consciousness or energy. But at this time, my grandpa was like, God is energy, and the thing about energy is it's apophatic. You can't say anything about it, and that's the most important thing. So long as you don't become attached to anything, so long as you're in the flow and you're not attached to anything. And that was another problem with the quadrant model. So he's like, you're attached to the quadrant model. Is that something you believe? He'd be like, is that something you believe? And he'd be, well, if you're in the flow, you don't believe anything. You're open to inquiry, you're open to insight. So he's just confusing me and he's putting me down and he doesn't understand the quadrant model. And I already knew that he didn't have respect for me. And the fact that he believed that the shoot away wasn't what messed up my shot, it was just me. And that's not true. So my grandpa just was confusing me, and like I started to hate him because of all this stuff. And he's looking down at me. But at the same time, I wanted to understand what he was teaching though. Like, cause there was something, that he was getting at, and I knew that it was like interesting stuff, and I didn't quite understand it. So then he's also confusing me with like the superior inferior stuff. So like he talked about dualistic software. It took a long time for me to understand it, and I'll get to it more later. But like, for instance, one thing that was making me more liberal. So again, I was left wing my whole life, and then I became right wing, and I became left wing again. Like, because my grandpa would say stuff like, the machines are making all this noise. I'm gonna move. But my grandpa would talk about like superior, inferior software. And I remember there was like a Muslim couple, and they didn't stand during the Pledge of Allegiance. And I asked my grandpa like what he thought about that. My grandpa was like, well, it could be that they're trying to break out of, dualistic software, and, to not try to be, a nationalist, and, just to be more globalist and everything is one. So I'm like, okay, so is my grandpa a globalist? Because so I'm thinking, okay, my grandpa's a globalist. He's a left-winger. He wants to dissolve nations and dissolve boundaries and stuff. So I'm like, okay. And that was my proclivity my whole life, to be a left-winger. So I'm starting to think my grandpa's a left-winger. So I'm like, okay, so I'll go back to being a left-winger. And that's what I'm thinking. So I went from being like anti-white, or anti-white left-winger my whole life, and then I went to being pro-white, and then I went back to being anti-white, because I'm like, is that what my grandpa's talking about? Because he's like, saying that the people, not the black couple who didn't stand during the national anthem, who are Muslims, he was like, yeah, well, there could be a higher aspiration, the trying to break out of dualistic software. So I'm like, okay, so my grandpa's a globalist, break out dualistic software. It took me a long time to understand what my grandpa was saying though, because now I know that, wanting race mixing and stuff, that could also be dualistic software. If you identify as I identified as Jewish, I saw myself as Jewish, and I wanted people to race mix. So, even my idea, like, let's dissolve all boundaries, I had an agenda. I had an ego agenda behind it, right? An ego proclivity to want that, because I wanted to defeat the white people, the Aryan race, right? So my grandpa's confusing me, and I'm like, huh. But later, my grandpa would teach me, like, much later, like, well, nationalism could also be, being a part of something greater than yourself. That's a step in the right direction, nationalism, because, you're not just a part of yourself, but you're part of a nation. But then my grandpa would be like, but then you can, then become insider, outsider in your nation, and that can be self-confirmatory, and then you can move toward globalism. But now I know that my grandpa would say that globalism doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to race mix and you have to dissolve all nations and stuff. But, globalism would just be like what my grandpa called mutual participation, where you're mutually participating and you're part of something greater than yourself, right? And that's us moving more toward the flow, my grandpa would say, right? But at this time, I didn't understand him. So I'm thinking that my grandpa's a race mixer, and he's globalist, because he says these types of things that seem like globalist, right? And so I'm just getting confused. He's confusing me, and I'm like, okay, so I went back to being a left winger, because I think that my grandpa's a left winger, and I'm just confused because he has right wing tendencies, like not giving to charity, but then he's also talking about like globalism. But now I understand my grandpa would be like, well, he would be like, move out of nationalism toward globalism. But I thought he meant like the whole race mixing and dissolving nations. And again, like my whole life, I knew that the right wingers were against Jews who were like globalists and stuff, and like the race mixers and stuff. And I was always against the right wingers, and I was always against the quote unquote white supremacists and the nationalists and stuff. But then I'm thinking, oh, my grandpa's also against that. Well, then I became a right winger, and then I became a nationalist. And I was like, yeah, no, there's a race mixing agenda, and it's sinister. But then my grandpa, he seems to be a globalist, and he's confusing me, and he's talking about like superior, inferior software, and like breaking out dualistic software. So I'm thinking, okay, so is he a race mixer? Is he for like dissolving borders, breaking out a dualistic software? So I'm confused. But then I went back into being a left winger again. So my grandpa's just confusing me. and I became a left winger. And so then I'm gonna get to this, but um, I'll get to like the books I started to write. So then I started writing my based on true story books, like, and one of the main reasons why I started writing those books was because my grandpa again wasn't teaching me, because we got in an argument because I was upset with him because he was trying to, because I was like, you're a big reason why my dad and mom aren't talking to me, because your whole stuff like try to make Ryan independent and no talking about the past, and it just led to terrible conditions that led to my mom and dad, thinking that they're justified in not talking to me. And they, my mom, like I said, my mom was like, she talked to the people at the psych, were like, I just want him to be independent. I don't want anything to do with him. I just want him independent. She was trying to parrot my grandpa. But she didn't realize it. And then the people at the psych ward were like, no, you can't do that. You sound terrible. And my grandpa would even say that. He would say that, yeah, she has dualistic software. She's immature and stuff like that. And she's expressing immature software and stuff. That's what my grandpa would say. But my mom didn't know that because she thought that she was doing what my grandpa wanted. But, and I would tell my grandpa, we'll fix it. And my grandpa would be like, no, I can't fix it because, yes, I admit that I made a mistake in casting pearls of swine, but I can't I will not give her any answers unless she asks the questions. She needs to ask questions first. So it's like, I was like, dude, you screwed things up. So then he got mad at me and he stopped teaching me. But I really wanted him to teach me more because, again, I was confused. I didn't understand the flow at this time. At this time, I didn't understand the flow, and he didn't teach me well. The stuff that I know now, I know because I've read Dr. Hora's book and other stuff. But at the time, he just confused me, and he never taught me well. So then he left me in the dark because he stopped teaching me. Because he was like, oh, I'm mad at you. I'm not going to teach you anymore. So then I'm just confused. So he left me just extremely confused, and I wanted to learn more. So I wanted him to teach me more. So then I started writing my based on true story books. And in the books, I was expressing because I became a liberal again, my liberal ideas, to break people out of like right wing. But at the same time, like a big part of the reason why I wrote the books was to make him feel bad, because I wrote in the books about the stuff that he did to make him feel bad, so he would start teaching me again. But really, I wanted him to teach me again because I was confused and I wanted to understand what was the flow. What is he talking about? Because I knew that there was something interesting that he was getting at, but I didn't quite get it yet because he never taught me well. And I'll get more to this later. So I'll talk about this more in the next lecture.